right there. So we'll see. We'll see if it gets filled. Anyways, we're gonna have an awesome panel today about bootlegs, the world of cute and ugly. It's pretty cool. It goes together. You know, you think about Yoda, right? He's pretty ugly and he's pretty cute. So what are you gonna do? First, a couple announcements. So I just want to repeat this a couple times because only people in seats get a treat. But strollers for children or laps or stuff like that doesn't quite count. So I just want to announce that. And also, as far as if you have to leave the room, there are 2 good reasons to leave this room. Well, 3, if you get absolutely outraged at the things you're about to see. That's one. The other one is if you have to go to the bathroom. If you have to, you can see Tony back there. He's our hall monitor who served in Iraq. I don't think he was a hall monitor there. But he'll give you a hall pass if you have to go to the bathroom, or if you have like a screaming child who can't handle how ugly these toys are. You can just go out there and kind of rock them so they can quiet down so everyone can hear. Because it's a pretty big room and the sound doesn't carry that well. I just want to remind you, in case you don't know, this is the collecting track, but this is just half. If you go across the hallway, it's this huge new galaxy of collecting track stuff. There's other giveaways like patches, there's other events, other panels, podcasts, offer signings, and the scavenger hunt. Who here has done the scavenger hunt? I see some people, and I see this right here. I collect Chewbacca. He never got a medal, but you can. Look at this thing. It's a star. It says Star Wars Celebration 6 Collector's Quest. So the way you get this star is only if you get every single stamp on the card that you get next door. And I'm going to give you a couple hints as to where you can get it stamped. Now you just think. Do you think you might be able to figure out this hint? Because it's not too hard. It'd probably help if I read it the right side up. Where are the hints? Where did the hints go? Oh, that was Friday. Here we go. So, you don't have to go online for a stamp, so relax in a lounge. Collecting 2 of these stamps can be an art, but you don't have to venture down an alley for them. And I think this is my favorite one. A stamp is not as permanent as a tattoo. I have no idea what that one is. So, that all being said, last thing we have to mention is the collecting track. You can buy this book. It's new for this celebration. It's got all the star tots on the back and the history of every collecting track ever given. That's $3, only $3. And you can also go out there and get a display for your star tots, which are only $20. They display beautifully. So with that, I present to you the ugly and beautiful Ron, John, and Joe. Okay, you can talk now.
It working?
Yep.
All right. Thanks for coming, everybody. This is our bootleg panel. We're going to be speaking about various unlicensed items from around the world, mostly from the vintage era. I think totally from the vintage era. My name is Ron Salvatore. I've been collecting for getting close to 20 years now. It's hard to believe, but it's true. I started collecting unlicensed items a long time ago with action figures. That's how I met Joe. Later on, John. These guys have kind of taken it to another level. So we're going to kind of present several different perspectives here, and just to let these 2 guys introduce themselves before I get going.
I'm Joe Yglesias. I've also been collecting for around 20 years. I've been collecting bootlegs for a little over 15, and it's pretty much gone from a mild curiosity just for something strange and weird looking in my collection to being my entire collection. So they can be very addictive.
My name's John Alvarez. I've been collecting about 15 years now. Although I've only been collecting bootlegs about 10, it's actually something that I've had an interest in since I was a child. My mother was actually a toy dealer from the New York area, so a lot of the toys she distributed were Chinatown knockoffs. So when I got into Star Wars, some of the first things I started looking for were knockoff toys. So went from there to where it is now.
Okay, so getting going. I'm going to do the first segment here, and it's not working. There's just a delay there. So I'm going to take the perspective of kind of very early products produced in the 70s and kind of give it a look, show the licensed products versus the unlicensed product out there, and kind of give you a background for what these guys are going to go into later. And one of the points I wanted to make was that this was a time when Star Wars was very popular. Licensees didn't really have time to get products out, so 78 came along, the movie had been out for a year, and a lot of times the big licensees still didn't have product out. It took Kenner a long time, for instance. So they had trouble meeting demand, and bootlegs often sprang up to fill the void. So these are things people are buying to fill the void where they couldn't find licensed product. These are often cheap and shoddily made products. A lot of times it's paper, puzzles, things like that, buttons, things you can churn out easily without a big production cost. You can get on the shelves really quickly. But they also have a lot of quirky charm a lot of times. Although they're cheap and even sort of ugly, as Sky mentioned, sometimes they're very charming in a quirky kind of way. Also, these items tell us a lot about what the public desired in Star Wars products. A lot of times you'll see an unlicensed product hit in the 70s before a licensed equivalent was out there, and then years later you'll find a company making a similar item. Maybe they got the idea from the bootleg company, hard to say, but it's possible. So starting off, this is a couple of pages from a publication known as Star Trek Galore, which focused on sci-fi stuff. And you can see a number of early Star Wars products here. I think this is in 77 or 78 that this comes from. You see up there in the upper left some badges that have various slogans on them, some business cards, which is interesting, just paper business cards. Then you see some buttons on the right. Again, this is very cheap stuff that someone might buy. I particularly like that Han Solo button on the right, the lower left corner of the right picture that has a little money for the S, the little money sign. The licensed equivalent of this was the buttons made by Factors. Here's two examples. You've probably seen some stuff like this. This is licensed official stuff. And here's the bootleg equivalent. That was some of these badges shown in that early ad. So these are some that I have in my collection. You'll see the little badges that just have little slogans. I like the Stormtrooper that says Terror Squad. It's kind of on PC. You wouldn't see that nowadays. Here's an example from Australia. So we really could never go over all the unlicensed buttons that were out there. This is just one cool example. That's Darth Vader with flying saucers for some reason. Comes from the collection of Pete Vilmer. Moving on from buttons to various little jewelry and trinkets. This is a vending machine card that has a couple of things on there that look like they might be Japanese licensed products. I'm not positive, but the X-Wing and TIE Fighter look pretty good. The other ones just look like a little Star Wars-ish. They aren't exact copies of the models seen in the films. But this is the kind of thing that parents buy for their children at the drop of a hat, really cheap, and there just wasn't that much of it out there license-wise early on. The one company that was doing this kind of thing was Heritage, which was a company that made these metal miniatures. They were unlicensed, however, and you see those metal miniatures in the upper left there. There's also some licensed posters, including a Battlestar Galactica poster there on the left, some belt buckles on the right, some more badges on the right, and I particularly want to focus on the top right there, which has jewelry, which is also by Heritage and made using the figures shown on the left page. So they took the figures and just attached it to keychains and necklaces and things like that. Now the licensed equivalent of this was the Weingeroff. This was a company that was affiliated with Factors and they sold licensed jewelry. There's a couple of examples. And there's the Heritage keychain, just as a comparison. And also you can see the painted just figure that's not a keychain right next to it. Again, here you see the Heritage keychain, the Weingeroff licensed version. Both of them are pretty nice. I'd say maybe the licensed one's a little bit nicer. It's more professional looking, but they're pretty charming pieces. And there you see Heritage's pewter sort of figure without the keychain. They advertise these as being a heavy pewter type metal. I don't know what that means, but it looks like pewter. You can see the sculpting is pretty cool. That's pretty much a whole set. I think there's one Bantam missing from this set, but you can see that a lot of them are painted. They did come painted. They also came in a gold plate. And there you see some close-ups with variations and a couple of gold-plated versions. This is a pretty popular set, one of the first figural sets of Star Wars items out there. It was not licensed though, so Lucasfilm was probably not happy that they were selling these things, but then again, people couldn't really buy this stuff from licensed vendors at the time. They also came in a box in some cases, but you had to buy them through catalogs, and I think even these were bootlegged by other bootleggers at certain points. Of course, there was no metal miniatures out there at the time, as I mentioned. It took Kenner a few years to get these out. This is the Micro Collection, which came out in 1982. So 5 years after or 4 years after the Heritage set was out there, they did have licensed metal miniatures finally on the market. It was only out there for a year, however. Then in the late 80s, West End Games came along with their metal miniatures. And then, of course, the Micro Machines had great success, Galoob in the 90s with plastic miniatures. So this is a concept that was a long time coming, but started out in the unlicensed realm. Moving on to posters. Of course, that's the Hildebrand posters produced by Factors, one of the most successful commercial products of the 70s. A lot of kids had this hanging on their wall next to their Farrah Fawcett posters, which was also produced by Factors. Very successful few years for them. It's obviously very similar to the Tom Young Style A one sheet, which is used for theater releases. This art was actually based on the Hildebrandt Brothers art. There were unlicensed versions as well. There's one. You can see it's a little bit similar, maybe not quite as nice as the Hildebrandt version. Darth Vader's looking the opposite direction, and Luke and Leia the positions are changed. There's no Star Wars on it, but it does say "May the Force be with you," so I guess that kind of hammers home the point. You're probably disappointed if your mom came home from the mall with this rather than the official one, but at least it's something to put on your wall. Lightsabers. Every Star Wars line has to have a lightsaber. Kenner's first licensed effort was inflatable. It was a little bit of a problem because it broke. I'm assuming it was inflatable because they were worried about kids hurting each other with these things. You know that a company does not have great confidence in this product when it ships it with a repair kit, which this did ship with. Finally, Kenner did release a hard version, a hard plastic version in 1980. It was called the Force lightsaber. That's it right there. But before that, there was a hard plastic bootleg version. It's called the Force Beam. It's basically a flashlight with a plastic tube stuck to the end of it. This guy made a lot of money on these things, selling them. That's even in Great Britain. That's an English ad you see there on the right. There was also other unlicensed versions in hard plastic. This is just one of the more famous examples. There were also unlicensed inflatable lightsabers similar to Kenner's. This is one example, Star Swords. And you'll see, oddly enough, that the handles on this thing kind of look like pirate handles for some reason. I'm not sure what the story is with that. But the most interesting part of this product is the box. You'll see the villain is kind of interesting. He might remind you of a Cylon. This is around the same time that Battlestar Galactica was popular, so they're kind of tying it in with that as well, possibly. But the hero character is even more interesting. I guess it's supposed to be Luke Skywalker, but his hair is kind of like Princess Leia's, which is odd. But even more interesting on the box maybe is the ad copy, which describes the product as being soft, inflatable fun, which the mind reels at the possibilities of that. Moving on, in the 70s you just weren't in style unless you had a big belt buckle, and this was an example of one of the licensed versions. It's a beat up example, but it is a licensed belt buckle. These are made by Basic Tool and Supply and Leather Shop. There were unlicensed versions as well. These are really cool 70s style, just textual belt buckles. Obviously you can read them yourselves there. They're believed to have been produced by Baron Buckles in brass. These again come from the collection of Pete Vilmer. There was also at least one unlicensed belt made back then in the 70s. Mostly the cloth belts didn't come out licensed until the 80s with the Return of the Jedi line. There's one example made by the Lee Company. I think there maybe was one licensed one in the 70s, but mostly the cloth belts were an 80s thing. So this kind of filled a gap in the 70s. I like this one more than the licensed one. I like the little R2-D2s that look like Space Invaders. They have little legs that you can see, which is just kind of really weird. Also that colossal head of C-3PO on the right. But the best thing about it by far is the buckle, which has an interesting saying on it. It's "Let the Force be with you," rather than "May the Force be with you." I'm not sure if that's a copyright thing or if the guy who made it just decided that sounded better or what. I also like how they put the little lines around Force to really emphasize the importance of that word. Mugs and ceramics. You might have seen at the last celebration, we did a bootleg panel and I just focused on ceramics and it was an extensive thing. We're not going to get into that again. Just want to touch on a few highlights. These are some of the first Star Wars licenses by California Originals, sculpted by Jim Rumpf, I believe is the name. And this kind of a really high quality, expensive tankard. You can see the characters yourself. Very high quality, very expensive to buy. But there were a lot of bootleg mugs out there. Here's just some examples. I'm not going to get too into it. You can kind of see for yourself. We could never show you all the mugs that are out there. This is just a very slight taste. And you can see they're charming. Not exactly ugly, but not nearly as nice as the licensed versions. A lot of these you can make yourself, so there's a craft angle to it as well. I just particularly want to spend some time with this mug because it's particularly interesting. You can see it has figural designs all around it. One of the most interesting is Princess Leia, who kind of looks like a B-52 there. I'm not sure what the hair is doing. There's also several other characters. Here you see Chewbacca, Vader, and C-3PO. They look a little bit like the real versions, but not exactly. Chewbacca in particular reminds me of General Zayas from Planet of the Apes. Darth Vader kind of reminds me of Dark Helmet. Actually looks a lot more like Dark Helmet than Darth Vader. And C-3PO kind of reminds me of Steve Urkel. He's got the glasses there. So, kind of an interesting mug. There was a lot of ceramics out there, as I mentioned. Some of it was just decorative. This doesn't have a purpose. You don't drink out of it or anything. It just stands there in your room and looks cool. It's a really nice Vader dueling Darth Vader that someone I think just made from scratch. Really, really high quality for a bootleg item like this. There were not any licensed examples of this thing in the 70s, so if you just wanted nice decorative ceramics, you really couldn't buy it. You had to go to the bootleg route. But Sigma did release a whole line of this stuff with Return of the Jedi in 1983, and there you see some examples on the right of C-3PO and the Rebo Band. So again, you have licensed stuff kind of being out there before there was any licensed equivalent on the market. Plush. We know from Steve Sansweet's books, including from concept to screen to collectible, that Lucasfilm was never happy with Kenner's efforts in the plush area. They didn't find them cuddly enough. Here's their R2-D2 and R2-D2 and Chewbacca. Pretty nice, but they aren't exactly cuddly. Unfortunately, the bootleg versions were also not cuddly. These, I believe, are stuffed with sawdust, and we think they were probably used as carnival prizes. So very cool, very big, very ugly. Definitely not the kind of thing you want to give to a little kid. And some items didn't fit in any specific category at all. There was no licensed equivalent, and I don't think there still has been. This is a lamp that uses the incandescent bulb inside of it to generate heat, and then the lamp spins around and throws designs onto your walls. The designs on it are pretty cool. Here you see Luke and Leia looking a little odd, but still kind of like Luke and Leia. But the most interesting graphic, I think, is that Darth Vader. I'm not sure what he's doing there. Looks kind of like he's playing air guitar. And that's probably the only instance of a Dark Lord of the Sith playing air guitar that I can think of. And with that, I'm going to kind of do a transition here to what these guys are going to talk about with action figures. And obviously, you're all aware of the licensed equivalent to those. This is the Kenner ones. Everyone's seen these probably a million times. These did not hit shelves until '78, so there was a lag before they came out. And before that, you had to go and buy something that was kind of a sketchy knockoff or an unlicensed product. These are the Arco Company Space War figures. They do look a little Star Wars-ish. You can see there's a Chewbacca-ish figure, a Darth Vader-ish figure. Pretty rare line. I think this is the whole set, right? All 6. Here you see a close-up. It shows you just how much like Darth Vader he is. So it's a fun thing to pursue if you ever want to try to collect something different. Another company doing this was Tomland. They made some Star Wars-ish figures in Amigo scale, so they're larger. There you see on the left basically a male figure with a Chewbacca head on it, which is odd, and a Darth Vader-esque figure there. These were actually sold explicitly kind of to tie in with Star Wars in the Montgomery Ward's catalog in '78. There you see they're featured with the Star Wars stuff, and there's the ad copy. Right next to it says, anyone that's seen the movie remembers the barroom scene. So they were kind of trying to hint that these could be used with Star Wars figures. Interesting thing about that is that the same year, '78, Montgomery Ward's competitor Sears also was selling Cantina figures, but they were licensed, obviously, in the Cantina Adventure set. So this is an example of Ward's and Tomlin Company kind of trying to compete with Sears by producing these Cantina figures that Kenner was already just making at the time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe, who's going to take you through a bunch more action figure stuff. I hope you enjoyed my segment.
Thank you, Ron. Where are we going? Going to bootlegs from around the world. Now, of course, in America, it was just the lag time that was keeping licensed product off the shelf. In other countries, there were trade restrictions against them, such as Soviet bloc countries, and in third world countries, it was just prohibitively expensive compared to the bootlegs for working families to afford toys for their children. But the bootleggers solved the problem in both countries, or both sets of the world, by putting their equivalent of Star Wars toys on the shelf. Now in Poland, part of the first lines of bootlegs were the original line, which is the line up top there. There were 4 that are definitely part of the set. The Chewbacca's, it's debatable whether they're part of the original set, but they're obviously quite a bit uglier than their licensed versions. And below them is one of the later bootleg sets out of Poland called the Deluxe series. They were very well made, very nicely done, and they came bagged with a little header card behind them. Really nice pieces. Another great piece out of Poland that doesn't really fit in any line is a black Hoth Trooper. Couldn't really hide him in the snow too well, but Another really great piece, nice rare carded example. Now, more Polish stuff, the more well-known Polish line would be the different generations of figures. The first generation was released on, there were 20 figures, 2 different card backs for the same company, and it's really not sure whether they were from different waves or why they changed the card back at that point in time and kept the same figures on. Now, if we get into colors, you can see there's quite a variety of things that don't quite look so much like their licensed figures. We got Leia with silver hair, we got a pink Weequay, lots of good stuff. Very fun to collect. You can collect a million different variations and still not be anywhere near done. And another thing that they did is they used different limbs. They use both TIE Fighter and Vector Scout limbs, and some figures both are available for. And those originally came out in 1985. In a lot of the Soviet bloc countries, the movies hit much later than they did in America, and as such, the bootlegs also did. From people we know that lived there, they used the bootleg figures as dead soldiers when they got real figures. So they just didn't want to play with them, they just used them as dead soldiers. And of course, here's some second generation carded and third generation carded. These are both incredibly rare. They're only 19 per set because the Barada mold got damaged at some point in time. And here we go into the unarticulated line, which is more ridiculous colors. There were 29 figures total. 17 were cast directly from Kenner figures, and 10 were cast from the first stuff we were just talking about, the Polish first gen figures. And 2 of the later figures were even cast from the Comic Spain PVC figures. Now, for many years, it was thought that the differences in height were just due to the cheap, low-grade plastic that was used. Recently, a friend of ours in Poland has discovered some information that there may have been 2 factories working together, both making the same lines. So there's definitely new information, even today, that can be found about, these great figures. Now, on to another line. The Dutch line of bootlegs. This was another really early set. There were 5 figures in the set. They were believed to have been used as carnival prizes. The R2 is the only one with any movable parts. And that's the 4 that you can see right there now. They had 2 sizes. There's a 3-inch and 5-inch line. And as you can see, he doesn't exactly have a regular lightsaber. He has more of a knight's sword at his side there. And now, I don't know. Like, yes, that's what the Dutch kids had to play with as a Chewbacca before the licensed toys were released over there. Great piece. Now we're on to Hungary on our tour through the bootleg world. Another country that, while licensed figures were available somewhat, they were very hard to come by and quite a bit more expensive. This was the first line of bootleg figures found in Hungary. The Yoda's nose is a pig-nosed Yoda because the nose is upturned and a little more smushed looking than its licensed counterpart. The Vader's has a solid block where the saber should be. Once again, these are very rare to find carded. There are only a handful of carded examples of either of these known to exist. More good stuff. And now we're on to the more commonly known line of Hungarian bootlegs, which I don't even want to try to pronounce. I never have. I just call them Hungarian. But anyway, there's 10 in the figure, 10 lines in the set. It's relatively easy to collect until you get to the more expensive ones, the Luke, the Vader, and the Fett, of course. But you can definitely find them. And this is a little variation on that. It was a store display set. There's a heavy overlay bubble that covers the whole thing. And there was actually a Hungarian collector trying to argue that overlay bubble never came on the figures, and he'd obviously never seen one. And this is what the kids in Hungary had to play with as a Y-Wing. This was actually sold. We found some figures that go with it that look more like Playmobil figures, which you'll find that commonly happens with a lot of bootleg lines. They do something sort of Star Wars like, but that comes in a variety of colors. It's a pretty great piece. Now on to Turkey, the most well-known line of bootlegs. The Uzay figures. There were 14 figures and 2 vehicles in the set. Construction-wise, they are among the best bootlegs made. They're like a loose one, unless you didn't, look for the copyrights. Some of them could be confused for the licensed counterpart they made that well. Now, there's some variations of the Uzay line. The Chewbacca came with the kind of boring, just close-up of him. which is actually the rare of the two. And the much more fun one with Gordon, a nice space scene. He's kind of hanging out on Kashyyyk, trying to hunt down some bosses, I guess. But more fun stuff. And then we've got 3PO variations. One with just 3PO on the card, and another with him hanging out with R5. I don't know if R2 would get jealous about that, but... And the bottom of the one with the R5 actually has, it says removable arms and limbs. That's what the translation, the Turkish text on that is. Now, more rosé stuff. The three most popular figures, of course, would be the Blue Star, because it's a blue stormtrooper in some orange ice cream or something. And then we have the Imperial Gunner doing his math homework. And then someone decided to dip an Emperor's Royal Guard head into some chrome, and we have the headman with his sword and shield, with a nice double moon behind him. These are probably the three most popular pieces out of the line, and definitely the headman's is the rarest piece out there, much rarer than even a Kenner Flex. Now, mini rigs, which a lot of times aren't shown, they're very much overlooked because of the figures. We have the MTV7 and the MLC3. Now that'd be, to me, be a cool toy to find on the shelf. Look at it, it's got play with blue stars, yeah, a bunch of blue stars. That's just like a fun toy to play with. Now, we're going to Spain and Greece. What do we have? We'll put Greedo on steroids. And that's actually bootlegged from another line of figures from Spain called Air Boys. They had a Greedo figure in their line, and he's kind of creeping around a corner in space there with his rifle. Pyroplast toys with him. It's a very similar line to Playmobil and Fisher-Price. And there's a close-up of the card with him hanging out on there. It's pretty fun stuff. There's another figure from their line, which is a Greedo. It's like a green scale monster. It's another pretty fun piece. That was actually a gift from another collector. And then we have from a line they did Ultraman bootlegs, a chrome Greedo. And another thing that came out of Spain, a lot of guns. A lot of different cap guns, a lot of different weird rifles, all with nice Star Wars imagery on them. Fun stuff to collect, not too expensive, gives you a good range of stuff to go for. Another odd thing out of Spain, it'll get both Star Wars fans and Doctor Who fans happy. There's a Dalek on there and R2 and some X-Wings. Can't beat that. Now on to Brazil. These figures are made out of lead. You really want your children cheering on these toys. They came boxed with different labels on there, and there are 36 figures in the first series. The two rarest out of there are the Leia Hoth and the AT-AT driver, with only a handful of these known to exist and no numbered boxes for them ever found. And then it gets a little further from Star Wars with the second series. Some things that sort of look Star Wars, but not quite. Another fun line to collect. There isn't much written out there yet, but that's going to change shortly. And if we go to Mexico, this is one of the best sets to collect. It's one of the cheapest to find. It's a Mexican semi-articulated set. Once again, really fun stuff, and lots of variations. You have 4 different molds for Yoda, 2 different molds for R2, 2 different molds for Vader, 2 different molds for Leia, and then 2 very different molds for the Hoth Trooper. And on to more Mexican stuff. We have carded stuff, found bagged, found carded, all kinds of different ways to come across this stuff in its native country. And of course, there were other figures from Mexico that weren't quite so movable and weren't quite so nice. They just took Kenner figures, made a mold, and that's what the kids got to play with. I wouldn't want to be that kid on their birthday getting those coming out of pinata. Other Mexican figures, a little more nicely made stuff. No one knows really why Luke Bespin is tied up there, and something tells me I don't want to know, so we'll leave it at that. And a Mexican bootleg boot snaggletooth. Another really tough piece, really fun item. And then Canada. They had an umbrella with pictures from line art from various Star Wars catalogs, and it said Battle Wars. Had a Cylon on it, a Cylon Viper. Pretty ridiculous piece. And that's what the Vader looks like up close. You can see he's got the actual extended piece from his saber. Not sure if they were thinking. Then on to Japan with the aptly named Stick Bang. And it's pretty much what it looks like. You shake it and it shoots a cap. But it's just the worst thing I could ever think of naming this Star Wars toy. And then there's a lot of weird Japanese stuff with Star Wars imagery on it. The toys have nothing to do with Star Wars. We have a grandizer piece with Star Wars. That's great for me because I collect Shogun Warriors. Then we have a thing with like a little army with a nice overlay of the Falcon on there. Then if you get further into even more of that stuff, it's pretty prevalent in Japanese culture. There's a lot of X-Wings, a lot of different spaceships that they took license from. And for you gamblers, we have an R2-D2 gambling game. Put in the little blue and red beads and it gives you a prize. It's a very strange piece. And model kits, those are also very prevalent. We have a Disco R2-D2 there. A couple of different X-Wings, really, fun stuff. Once again, reasonably available. Lots of fun to collect. And these, I don't know why they gave them claw hands, but I guess they didn't want they wanted to make them that much different from license, so we'll give them claws. That'll keep Lucasfilm losses away. But more model kits, more fun stuff, and at ATST and AT-ATs. Then we get to the weird R2s. We have R2 with a turban on his head. We have him with a pilot's helmet on. And then with the Star Command line, decided to take it one step further. Oh, wrong slide, my bad. Just another Star Command piece that's kind of okay, but the one they tried to go a little further, they took R2-D2 and gave us this. The Star Command R2-D2 with his German helmet, complete with swastikas. I don't think they're viewed as badly in Japan as they are here, because that toy would never fly. The toy store that had that would probably get burned down. And onward to some finds. We'll turn you over to Mr. John Alvarez.
I'm going to handle this section a little differently than we normally do. People don't usually talk about finds. In collector circles, finds are where people track down either people who worked for the factories or original owners and turn up large lots of figures. Normally finds are kept kind of quiet because people don't want people to find out who their sources are or anything. So a lot of these pictures have never really been shown before, but these are some of the finds that Joe and I have done over the years. This was back in 2002. This was actually the second find that we did with a Polish collector named Jacob who started helping us out. At the time, it was rare to find one or two Polish figures, and he was pulling lots like this for us. And this lot in particular has some really interesting pieces in it. That IG-88, most of the ones that had come before they're made of rubber and painted silver. This one was actually shot in a hard plastic silver. It's been 10 years since that one turned up and we've still never found another one. These unpainted figures here actually sourced back to the factory. They were assembled but just never got to the painting stage. Ewoks that turned up. That's the first time that Chirpa turned up in that color, and actually that's probably like the second or third one maybe that turned up at the time. Yeah. And this set of original figures, at the time we didn't even know what they were. Over time we found out that they were the first line of figures released in Poland, and they came bagged with header cards, and like I said, it's been 10 years since this turned up, and there's a handful of these out there now, but we've still yet to even see one of them bagged. In that lot, we also turned up a handful of guns, some first-generation guns on the bottom. The Chewbacca rifle is of particular interest. It's one of the only bootleg rifles I've ever seen that doesn't have the arm strap. And if I'm not mistaken, I've never seen another one of those rifles turn up. And along with the unpainted figures, we also got a bunch of figures that were unassembled and some of them still on the sprues. About a year later, we turned up another lot, and although it's a small lot, those two carded figures that turned up are two of the only 3 known carded figures in the hobby. It's been 9 years since then, and no other ones have still turned up. There's one Fett out there that disappeared off the face of the earth, but that's it so far. Again, a couple of months later, another small lot, but the carded figure that turned up is actually a bag of weapons. First generation and the later series on the small cards like this came without weapons. You had to buy weapon packs separately, and that's the only weapon pack known to exist still. Another lot here, figures of interest are in the bottom row. The Moraine Guard at the time was extremely rare, and the Yoda, this was the first time we'd ever seen a bag sample. Although the bag is open, it came with the original bag and the header card. It wasn't until a few years later that a Yoda and AT-AT driver turned up at the same time, but to this day there's still the only 3 known. It's another large lot. I believe this one has 21 of the 27 figures available in the unarticulated set in there, all of them in multiple colors. Of particular interest is a complete set of Ewoks in there, including the Logray. I believe at the time that was only the second one to turn up, along with a Reeves, also at the time maybe the second or third to turn up. Then the guy who was helping us out started reaching out and actually came in contact with somebody in the factory and was able to turn up a large lot of unused card backs along with more parts on screws. This is pretty much the equivalent of a Kenner proof card find. At the time there was nothing like this that really existed, let alone for unlicensed figures. Another lot we turned up later. This one of particular interest because it came with a complete set. This set is exceedingly difficult to assemble. The Moraine Guard can be tough to find in the Rees or near impossible, and to turn up a complete set in one shot is just an amazing find. I mean, this guy really helped us out with a lot of stuff. This is probably one of my favorite finds. Figure in the top corner, the Hoff Trooper. At the time, Joe had a red one, and we'd heard rumors that there were black and yellow ones, but had never seen any proof. When this turned up, it actually had 3/4 of the card with it. We were thinking it was the first one, and then something reminded me and Joe of an earlier ad in Toy Shop. This was 10 years earlier. If you look in that bottom corner, there's a picture of the Hoff Trooper, and if you look at number 30, you'll see that it sold for a measly $50. As Joe pictured earlier, another one did turn up years later, which Joe paid quite a bit more than $50 for.
That's the next slide there, Pat.
But still, to this day, I mean, these two and that carded one that disappeared are the only ones known to exist. Although this wasn't a find per se, Joe and I went down to a convention in Mexico back in '04, and this is just from shopping at the convention and going around to local flea markets and such. There's something like 91 figures and vehicles in this lot, all of them different and all of them unique pieces that Joe didn't have in his collection. So, I mean, although it's not a find that we bought from somebody, sometimes going to the country of origin, you can really turn up some amazing stuff.
And that's just the stuff I bought to keep for myself.
Yeah, those were all individual pieces that he didn't own. This is a great story. There was a guy who turned up on Rebel Scum message boards back in '05 named Murat. He started posting pictures of Uzes, and Uzes are difficult to assemble. And if you look at this picture, it's a complete set with multiples of some figures, both vehicles. And if you look closely at the headman, you'll see not only does he have a shield, but a sword in his hand. At the time, I believe that was the first sword that had even turned up besides the hearted one. It was just amazing to see all of these in one place. And Murat was actually a really fun person. Posted lots of pictures of his collection as he was telling us the stories, including this one of all of his figures, figure skating. He mimicked some of the card backs. He just really had fun with this, and he was a great person to get some information from. I'll show you a picture in a second, but when most people think of childhood pictures, they think of this. This is from Christopher Yglesias' childhood, scrapbook that he was keeping with all of his Star Wars stuff. It's pictures of the creatures from the cantina and him saying he hopes he gets them for his upcoming birthday or Christmas. Here's some pictures that I drew from the card backs when I was a child. Well, here's a picture Murat drew from his childhood. When he thought about Star Wars, there's a Vader there and there's two ERGs there, but when he thought of Hoff Troopers, he actually had blue stars in there. I think that's just absolutely fantastic that's an actual childhood picture of his, and he's using Use figures to draw his Star Wars drawings. I mean, a lot of people don't think about it, but that's why we get into these foreign lines, because they didn't have access to actual Kenner toys, and to them, this was Star Wars. So it was just amazing to look into his childhood like that. I'm going to go through these kind of quickly. A lot of people, when they think about bootlegs, they think they're shoddily made. They think about, I found some of these pictures on the internet of people making customs and stuff using rubber molds. Think about stuff like this, or some more molds. And here's actually Sucklord's mold for his infamous Gay Empire Stormtrooper that he released. They're just cheaply made in rubber molds that deteriorate fast, or other molds are made, just either in ceramic. But these are actually the ceramic molds for what Ron pictured earlier, the mugs. And they're just cheaply made, ceramic wears down fast. You'll get a couple of pulls off of it and that's it. But the thing with some of these lines is that they were actually, pretty well made. These are the actual metal molds used to make some of the figures from the Polish company, which I will not even try and pronounce. You can see there's two different styles of molds on the bottom with the rounded edges or square edges, and the one on top actually has all of the housing that was in it for producing everything. These were pretty much made just like Kenner figures or any of the other produced ones were. When Joe mentioned earlier there were two different companies. When the first one went out of business, they just sold the molds to the second company and they transferred over. And a friend of ours got in touch with the company and was able to release some of these molds for us. They also came with some of the pieces that came out of the molds. This just gives you an idea of how the production was. They're still attached to the screws, kind of like a model kit would come. They're just broken apart and assembled and then painted. Here's another one just to show you what it looked like. Got several different lots of these came up. Every figure except Vader turned up with these from the second generation of figures from the new factory. We also turned up the card backs, which they inherited from the older company. Here's just some examples of what they would have looked like when they went to final production. The infamous Musée line, Joe's talked about these before. I actually showed some pictures this weekend. I'm going to go through a couple of these. You'll see the molds. They're usually done with the arms and legs in one mold, and then the torsos front, back, and the head separately. Just to show you some of these, this is actually the Headman mold, one of the rarest figures in the set, and Joe's got the molds for all of them. It's just amazing that these things still exist and that collectors were able to get their hands on them and that we're able to share these pictures now. I mean, most people wouldn't even know. Like I said, you assume they're cheap molds or something. These were actually pretty sophisticated companies. They put a lot of time into stealing your money. This is actually a really neat piece. I'm sure this is close to Joe's heart. Pictures of this turned up years ago. It's actually a mock-up sample from the Musée line. It looks like it's just a Kenner carded figure. If you look, it's just a regular Hawk Trooper with a blue gun. It looks like a standard Kenner with some work done on top of it, including a change in the artwork to show what the final one would have looked like. This piece is supposedly out there. There's not much information about it except the picture that leaked out, but maybe for the next panel, Joe will actually have his hands on it. We could show some better pictures of it.
That would make me very happy. Not my wallet, though.
This is actually a fun story. This was a mold for a Mexican piece. This actually turned up. A Mexican collector was looking through a flea market and actually found it. Somebody from the factory decided they wanted to get rid of it. You see a close-up of the mold right now, along with the crappy figure that came out of it. It's a 12-inch, pretty cheaply made plastic figure. The funny thing about the story is, though, that when it turned up, Joe had actually made a very generous offer on it, wanted to add it to his collection, and he decided that he'd put it on eBay because he wanted to get more money for it. Well, ironically, Joe actually won it for less than he originally offered, so the moral of the story is, you might not want to be greedy sometimes and take a good offer when you see it.
I usually pay more than everybody else for these things.
These are actually pretty cool mock-ups. Aside from that, Hawk Trooper piece don't really usually exist. This was the line Ron mentioned earlier, the Space Wars line. I'm going to cycle through some of these pictures, but the one on the left is actually the mock-up. You can see different colors in the logos, the colors in the backgrounds. If you look at the pictures of the figure themselves, the later artwork, they added a helmet to it. The backing itself is actually a chrome one, which is a photographic type of stock that's usually used for color proofing. It was just glued to a backer, and then all of the figures were glued down with a bubble on top of it, just as a representation of what they wanted to put out. It's another piece that also turned up from the same source. This is a 3-pack, and as far as I know, this piece was never actually released. All the figures on there are regular figures, but the heads are all prototype resin heads that are hand painted, and the artwork itself, I'll show you some pictures. There's a close-up of it, and if you look closely at the actual card art that was released, for each one of them, they do differ slightly. I mean, the Stormtrooper's head and the chest details, the 3PO's head and some of the background colors, even the position of his arm. So these were really early pieces that were released out there. If you look at the heads of the one on the left, you'll see what I was talking about. These are hand-painted resins, and even the details on those differ, so they were resculpted later. The Chewbacca was actually the closest of them. The final slide here actually shows you the chromoline separated from the board to show you that it was really just a picture glued down to a board to put this representation out there. We just wanted to show you some of these because, like I said, pictures like this aren't usually released. People just see the toys and that's it, so we wanted to share some of the background. We're going to go on to Q&A now. Does anybody out there have any questions?
Yes, you got a question? Go on. Yes, we're ready. Hop up. Just asking if they have any of the Space War toys that were showed.
Let's suppose that they weren't made for Star Wars stuff. Rather than anyone ever heard of the Space War video. Weren't they made like that?
So the question is, could it be tied into the Space War video game, and why not?
Joe, you want to have that?
The characters don't match up to the Space War video game. They match up more closely to Star Wars figures. And the timing is a little more correct for that.
Yeah, these were released actually in '77, so I mean they were released many, many years before.
No problem.
Other questions? Yes. So the question is, are there any Peruvian bootlegs?
There's a game, there's a Peruvian board game, and that's pretty much all I know of for Peruvian unlicensed products. I'm sure there's probably a few posters and a few other oddball things here and there that we haven't seen, but as far as figures are concerned, nothing that's come our direction yet.
More questions?
No.
Yes. The question is, why are there no Jawa bootlegs? It is a big question.
Hard figure to bootleg, I think, because even Kenner had trouble with the original sculpt of the vinyl cape, and then it didn't really look like a Jawa, so they put the cloth thing on, and that kind of makes it expensive. So I think if I'm a bootleg toy maker, I kind of stay away from that figure as well. It's also kind of small. I mean, it's not that impressive looking. But
There's actually, Mexico's an interesting country when it comes to bootlegs because bootlegs are still being put out to this day, and they're still bootlegging the vintage figures. I have seen some rubber figures of the Jawa from Mexico, but they're probably more within the past 5 to 10 years as opposed to vintage, but they are based on the vintage mold. And then there's also some fakes out there that you should be careful of.
Another question?
Seeing all the bootlegs from the other countries, did they have at any time the option of getting the real licensed products at all?
It really depends on the country.
Let's repeat the question. So, did any of the bootleg countries have the licensed versions available at the same time?
As I was about to say, it really does depend on the country whether they had the licensed items available. Soviet bloc countries were not able to legally import Star Wars toys, but sometimes they were able to be bought on the black market as far as the legal ones were concerned. Other countries, like say Mexico, they had licensed toys, but they were very expensive compared to the bootlegs, so a lot of times people bought the bootlegs instead.
Yeah, a lot of the Polish figures were distributed in Germany, and Germany definitely had Parker distribution.
Yep. And General Mills.
Poland, I don't think, had actual distribution of licensed Star Wars products until the mid-'80s. So I mean, Star Wars stuff was already over by the time they actually had the license. A friend of mine sent me a book from the early 90s of an actual licensed Star Wars novel and said it was one of the first things he'd actually seen in this country. So, I mean, some of them are available, but for the most part, a lot of these countries didn't have the distribution at the time.
Yes.
Are there any instances, especially with the U.S. stuff, of Kenner or Lucasfilm sort of dropping the hammer on any of these companies? Maybe more from the U.S. than from the international.
So the question is whether did Kenner or Lucasfilm ever actually drop the hammer and legally attack any of these bootleg companies?
I think in Steve Sansweet's book, From Concept Screen to Collectible, that I mentioned earlier, he mentioned he'd gone through Kenner's files and I think he found some stuff like that. I think the guy who did the Force Beam lightsaber was maybe sued. It sounds familiar.
Yeah.
But there's some stuff like that in his book. But other examples, specific examples, I'm not coming up with them. I remember hearing that Heritage was threatened with a suit from producing those metal miniatures and they had to stop doing them. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. That was the rumor way back when.
The saber that you're talking about, there's a picture on a Star Wars Collector's Archive, Gus's site. He's actually got a piece that he got from Lucasfilm. It's the box, although the saber's not included, it was for a saber and it came with a cease and desist letter from them, and I think it was for the Force Beam.
I mean, I'm sure it happened quite a bit, and we just haven't necessarily heard about it or have direct evidence of it, but I'm sure that, you know, Lucasfilm isn't going to allow people to be doing that if they know about it, so I'm sure a lot of these companies ended up, at least the ones in this country, I'm sure ended up getting cease and desist letters.
And as far as companies outside of the country, Model Trem, once Glasslead got the license to do Star Wars toys in Brazil, Model Trem were threatened with a lawsuit, and that's why the second series of figures existed, because they already had a lot of the tooling done for another series of Star Wars figures, so they had all the parts and body parts ready. They had to alter them a little bit to release them as the second series, so they weren't exactly Star Wars figures.
I think that's pretty much about much time.